Hello everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. As my name suggests, I focus on conservative politics and have been looking in a couple videos at the GOP presidential primary and the race for the Republican nomination for the presidency in 2024. But it's time we look at the Democratic presidential primary race here in 2024 because there's some interesting things going on that are definitely relevant and are major factors that could affect the November 2024 election. Primaries don't tell everything, they don't tell the whole story, and you can't predict what's going to happen in the November general election solely based on primaries for either the Republican side or the Democrat side. But you definitely can get some readings of voter energy, voter excitement for a candidate, and just overall how a candidate is performing with certain factions of their party and in certain states across the nation. So we're going to do that now, analyzing Biden's performance so far in the primary and what that means in a good or bad way for his chances in November. But before we do, please like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It goes a long way in supporting the channel and getting my content shared out to more viewers across this platform. I thank you for your support, and now let's get into the video. So first, to get a gauge of how Biden's doing, we see he's running against a couple no-name candidates, really. Representative Dean Phillips from Minnesota, a current sitting congressman, a couple other minor no-name candidates. But he's also faced an uncommitted campaign of protest votes, mostly coming from Muslims and progressive Democrats protesting Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war in the Middle East. And we can see here it's actually been so successful, it's gotten 500,000 votes so far to date in this primary and 20 delegates, even though it's not an actual person, it's just a ballot choice, which is really kind of funny. And that's been something that's really shown some apathy toward Joe Biden and some anger towards Joe Biden and his handling of certain issues that he promised to do a little better on and be more progressive on. And the problem is you have Joe Biden, who represents the more establishment, run-of-the-mill Democrats, and you have then the progressive Democrats in the Democrat Party, and he's always going to be upsetting one of them with certain moves he makes, especially on hot topics like the Israel-Hamas war. Or you take even things like climate change. If he really enacts strong climate change policies and regulations that crack down on certain industries, mostly manufacturing industries, he's really going to lose support with any moderate establishment leftover Democrat voters he has in that voter base of the white working class and just working class in general voter base. But if he doesn't implement those regulations, he's going to lose support from progressive Democrats who will be energized to vote uncommitted in the primaries. He has a very weakly held together coalition that is just waiting to burst, and the uncommitted vote is a big sign of that. And if you look at states like Minnesota, for example, we can see here that he only got 70% of the vote and uncommitted got almost 20% of the vote. Really, really shocking numbers here, especially for an incumbent such as Joe Biden. And also in Michigan, I believe it was, he got 80% and uncommitted got 13% of the vote, which again is ridiculous for it not actually being a person. It's just a protest vote. So not showing great signs of strength as an incumbent. Joe Biden's definitely not. And he also lost a contest in American Samoa to this guy right here, Jason Palmer. No one had ever heard of him. No one even knew he was running for president until he won American Samoa. And yes, it's American Samoa. It's a territory. No one really even thinks about it. But Joe Biden became the first incumbent president running for re-election to lose a primary contest since Jimmy Carter in the 1980 Democrat primaries. And guess what? He went on to lose in a landslide in that election to Ronald Reagan and become a one-term president. There's a lot of parallels between Joe Biden and Jimmy Carter, and this is the latest one, and not a good sign at all for Joe Biden. And if we go down to Hawaii as another state I want to talk about, he got 66% of the vote and only 1,000 votes. Only 1,000 votes. In 2020, he got 21,000 votes. So he got 5%, give or take, of his vote total from 2020. Not a sign of enthusiasm. The uncommitted vote got 30% in this primary. Joe Biden is not showing the normal signs of strength that you see an incumbent president running for election in the primaries. he has 86.6% of the overall primary vote to the state, which is really not as strong as you think it is at face value. That's normally a good number, but for incumbent president, it's really not. He should be getting 90% of the vote, especially where he has really no major primary challenges. He only has a really irrelevant congressman running against him in Dean Phillips, who no one has ever really heard of. And you also have an uncommitted protest vote coming against him. And those two are adding up to at least take away usually anywhere from 10 to 20% of the vote, sometimes even 30, like you saw in Minnesota and Hawaii. So not good signs right there from Joe Biden. He has not even won every single primary contest as the incumbent. He lost American Samoa, which is a little bit of a joke, but it also shows that he's kind of vulnerable. And so not only analyzing the current state of the primary race, his challengers this time, and his challenge is to have a strong showing in each primary, but we also can compare his vote total from 2020 to now. And we can see here in certain states, we look at Ohio, in 2020, he got 650,000 votes, whereas in Ohio this time, he only got 450,000. That's a 200,000 vote drop-off. Dean Phillips, who had dropped out of the race, got 13% of the vote against an incumbent. And we can see the light purple where Phillips did a little better and Biden did a little worse. That's in the more working-class area of the state, showing some big displeasure against voting groups that could swing to Donald Trump that are more moderate establishment, lifelong Democrats. So not a good sign for him. If we also go to the Illinois vote total from 2020, Biden got almost 1 million votes in the state, whereas this time, he got not even 700,000 votes. That's a 300,000 vote drop-off in a reliably Democrat state as Illinois. That's not a good sign. And in Ohio, it's not a good sign because that's a state that's not a swing state and really shouldn't even be that competitive this time. It's still a fairly competitive state and was the last two cycles. Trump won it by 8 points, which is a substantial margin of victory, but it's still somewhat competitive and a state that Biden put a lot of resources into last time. And it's a state that he is not showing to be the strongest in this time. And it's also a symptom of his problem with the working class base because Ohio has this very similar electorate to states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, generally speaking. So that does not bode well for him. In Michigan, in 2020, he got 840,000 votes. This time, Michigan, he got 623. Again, a 200,000 vote drop-off. It's not just a fluke to Illinois and Ohio, and it's really happening in the Rust Belt area, which is not very good for Joe Biden. Minnesota, this time, 171,000 votes. Last time in Minnesota, in 2020, he got 287,000 votes. Again, 100,000 vote drop-off. It's not a fluke. He keeps getting less votes in the 2024 primary states than he got in those same states in 2020. Not a good look. If we look to here, we can also see a quick overview. He's really struggling to crack 90% consistently. He has a lot of 80% showings, and he has some very low 80% showings, the 70% in Minnesota. He got 73% only in Oklahoma, 66% in Hawaii, as I said before, and just a lot of 80% showings. You'd expect an incumbent president to get more in the 90% range of the vote, especially running with little to no name challengers. In 2020, Donald Trump got 18 million primary votes against similar opposition to Biden in the sense that he had little opposition as an incumbent president, little actual opposition. And he received the most votes ever for an incumbent president in a primary, a Republican and Democrat, and he got 94% of the vote in the primary overall, almost 10% higher than what Joe Biden is getting in his primary. And also, Donald Trump consistently got higher vote totals in the 2020 primary states as the incumbent than he did in those same states in 2016 when he's running for president. So we have a good comparison between Trump and Biden, two candidates that are running against each other once again. So they're a fair and good comparison. And Trump was having a much stronger showing overall as the incumbent president than Joe Biden is. And Trump went on to lose. What does that say about Joe Biden? It says that he is in a strong position to lose big time, not just lose, in the November elections. And if we scroll down here to see the overall results, he was consistently getting over 90% of the vote. And the only times where we see him get below 90% would be in reliably blue or leaning blue states. New Hampshire, he got 85%. Lots of 90%. Maine, he got 84%. Massachusetts, 86%. More 90% showings. And then Utah, he got 88%. It's a state that's uniquely weak for Donald Trump. That's not that surprising. Vermont, he got 87% of the vote. Keep going, more 90% showings, more 90% showings, 100% showings in some caucuses, 87% in Maryland. And he goes down to here, more 90% showings, and then a random 87% showing in Kentucky, but that was the anomaly. 88% showing in Delaware, and 78% showing in Connecticut. My good old home state was his worst showing, of course. But the point I'm trying to make overall here is you had 6 or 7 finishes for Donald Trump where he finished below 90%. And in all of them except for 2, they were in states that were reliably Democrat states. Take Louisiana, for example, that's sitting right here. He got 96% of the vote. You don't see many mid to high 90 finishes for Joe Biden against no-name competition. Joe Biden is getting 80% and sometimes lower in key swing states of Michigan, Minnesota, not exactly a swing state, but it's been competitive. North Carolina, he couldn't even crack 90%, got 87%. And again, you see the no preference, which is the uncommitted option, getting almost 13% of the vote. And then in South Carolina, we can see here that he got 125,000 votes and 96% in this primary, which is not surprising because he did very well in South Carolina. It was the first state he won, and it gave him momentum ahead of Super Tuesday that year and propelled him to the nomination. Instead, though, we can look at his 2020 vote total in South Carolina as a comparison, and we can see that he got more than double his vote total that he got this time. Another state, in Virginia, we see he got 300,000 plus votes. But Marianne Williamson, a no-name candidate, almost got 10% of the vote here. And in 2020, Joe Biden won the state also in that primary, and he got 700,000 votes. So he got less than half of his vote total from 2020 this time around in Virginia. And Virginia is poised to be a more competitive state this time. After it went for Joe Biden by 10 points in 2020, it should be much closer as the state is turning a corner and has seen a shift toward Republicans in the last 4 years during his presidency. And then finally, if we look in Georgia, this is a big one. He got 95% of the vote. Okay, another state that he actually got over 90% of the vote, and actually in the mid-90s in this primary cycle. And he got 275,000 votes. But if you look in 2020, he got almost 1 million votes. He got 920,000 votes in the state. And he got 85% of the vote running against Bernie Sanders. This time, he got only 275. That's over 600,000 less votes. That is an unbelievable drop-off. In a state that he flipped blue, a state that had been reliably Republican for many years, and a state that would be key for him to win re-election. It's going to be one of the top 6 swing states in the country, and yet he has a massive energy problem here. Not even coming close to his showing in the primary in the year that he went on to surprisingly win the state. He has a massive energy problem, especially with black voters in Atlanta, which is where he garnered enough votes and did so well among that voter bloc to win the state in 2020. It's really just crazy to see how much Biden has struggled in the primary, and it's really a good sign for Republicans heading into the fall. Trump has done very, very well as a non-incumbent candidate against a challenger such as Nikki Haley that has a different base than he does, a more moderate base that she was able to rally as a candidate that has name recognition. She was a former governor. She was a former UN ambassador under Donald Trump. So she's not a no-name like Dean Phillips. He's a random congressman from Minnesota that someone in another part of the country will probably never have heard of. She has name recognition. He's running against her. Even before she dropped out, he was consistently getting in the 60s, 70s, and 80% of the vote as a non-incumbent. Joe Biden has been getting similar numbers, and this is all happening as the incumbent. Joe Biden is historically weak compared to past presidents that ran for re-nomination for both Republican and Democrat. He's doing far worse than Donald Trump did running for re-election in 2020 in the primary. He can't post big W's against no-name competition and protest ballot initiatives, and doesn't have the voter enthusiasm and energy behind him to match or supersede his vote totals from the 2020 primary. He has no energy behind him. He's not popular. He's actually despised. And the voters that don't despise him feel very apathetic toward him. If Joe Biden is struggling to galvanize Democrat support behind him in the primary as the incumbent president, it doesn't paint a confident picture for what his performance will be in the general election in November. The overall picture that is painted from this analysis of the Democrat primary is that Joe Biden is vulnerable to being absolutely shellacked in November, and that Donald Trump has a landslide victory there for the taking. The ball is in his court because Joe Biden has fumbled the ball in both his campaign and certainly his presidency.